30 years of finding brands that capture a billion.
Good morning, you're watching All You Need to Know on Bloomberg Quint. I'm Darshan Mehta. Let's take a look at first what happened as far as the global markets were concerned. The cues were decent. The US markets were up anywhere between 0.5% to 1%. Europe did manage to rally anywhere close to 2% on an average, 1.5% to 2%. So the cues are extremely strong. Asia is off to a strong start at this point of time. So we're seeing that the SGX Nifty is also reacting positively to the comments that are coming in and the cues that are coming in from Asia and global markets. Up 46 points. So we are opening close to about the 10,800 mark in trade. As far as the ADRs are concerned, except for two, all the ADRs ended with a positive bias. Tata Motors was up 7%. The banks did manage to rally. The metal stocks did manage to rally. Dr. Reddy had news of its own, and that's why it was down in trade, but nevertheless Infosys was also down almost 0.3%. Now if you're looking at the Nifty was up almost 2%, but look at the move that's coming on the broader end of the market. So for the past three trading session, the broader markets are managing to outperform the Nifty. Even the Nifty Bank, the Nifty PSU Bank also doing extremely well in trade, up close to 2% for both of them. Now if you're looking at the fund flows, FI sold in 1,300 crores, DI is bought in 1,100 crores in the cash market. Basically, if you're looking at the Nifty contribution, the HDFC Twin contributed significantly. L&T, ICICI Bank, Reliance, all these counters contributed. On the negative side, it was only Dr. Reddy's which actually managed to pull it down by 4 points. Apart from it, negligible contribution coming in from the remaining of the participants. As far as the F&O markets are concerned, you could see that there was fresh buying that was seen on the Nifty. Open interest build up of 1.5%. The Nifty Bank also managing to move up, almost open interest build up of 11% on the long side. As far as where positions are being taken, 10,500 is the support, 11,000 is the resistance. From 10,700 to higher levels, it's the call writers that are active, and from 10,800 to lower levels, it's the put writers that are active. What will happen today because of the up move and the traction that we have seen? Again, put writers will become much more aggressive, and call writers will be forced to shed positions in open interest. There are two stocks in the F&O band, and they remain Adani Enterprises as well as Adani Power. The PCR both for the Nifty and the Bank Nifty managed to inch up significantly given the fact that the markets did manage to rally. The stocks which saw fresh buying or fresh shorts on high open interest build up, you had TVS Motors which managed to rally, you had Cholamandalam which managed to rally. Dr. Reddy's had news of its own and it saw fresh shorts on open interest build up of 14%. And in terms of stocks which moved on open interest decline, in fact all of them saw a lot of short covering that came in, except for the Hexaware which was flat in trade. All the others saw short covering that came in. So yesterday was a day in which mid-caps rallied on the back of short covering that was seen in the markets. These are all the domestic cues. Let's go across to Bloomberg's Paul Allen for all the top international headlines.
The new governor of the Reserve Bank of India described himself as a consensus builder as he defended the institution's autonomy to investors worried that the government wants more control. Shaktikanta Das is the RBI's third leader in as many years and said he would uphold the bank's integrity and credibility. Das was a key part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's controversial cash ban 2 years ago.
I have convened a meeting with the MD and CEOs of the MDs and the CEOs of the public sector banks tomorrow in the morning. And as you know, banking is an important segment of our economy, and it's currently facing several challenges which are of critical importance and they need to be dealt with.
President Trump's former lawyer and fixer is heading to jail, still pledging to give potentially damaging information to prosecutors. Michael Cohen was given 3 years after failing to win the leniency he sought from Robert Mueller. Cohen accepted responsibility for his crimes, saying, quote, "It was my duty to cover up Donald Trump's dirty deeds" before the 2016 election. The White House declined to comment. The Iranian oil minister has joined Twitter, saying he wants better communication at home and abroad. The platform is officially banned in Iran, but is being increasingly used by authorities, including President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. The oil minister, Bijan Zanganeh, tweeted he was joining Twitter for a more dynamic and effective relationship with his domestic and foreign audience. The man suspected of killing 3 people in Strasbourg remains on the run, with police saying he had a long criminal record. 29-year-old Sharif Chekat says was first convicted at 13 and had a string of police records across France and in Germany and Switzerland. In total, Chekat had 27 convictions and was well known to police and France's equivalent of the FBI. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Paul Allen. This is Bloomberg.
Here is our renewed mission: delivering the Brexit that people voted for, bringing the country back together, and building a country that truly works for everyone.
What we learned today is that there are 117 people who don't back her leadership. It doesn't translate directly into people who don't back her Brexit deal, but there's a certain amount that can be inferred from that. So she needs these concessions from Europe. One possible bargaining tool is the risk of a no deal. We will get that on March the 29th if nothing else is agreed. The EU doesn't want to see that happen, so that could be used to reach these concessions. From the draft summit of conclusions that have seen by Bloomberg, EU leaders saying that they will explore further assurance. So a slight conciliatory tone being drawn there, although they say that this will not change or contradict the withdrawal agreement. So they're not going to veer too far from what's already being agreed. The people that she really needs on board are the DUP, the Northern Irish Party, that are currently propping up the government. They are crucial if she's going to have the numbers to get this deal through Parliament, which is what she so desperately needs right now.
Crude oil prices gave up all of its gains in just the last half hour of trade in Wednesday, with Brent crude falling from 2% higher to end the day marginally in the red after U.S. inventory data showed that American stockpiles had fallen 1.2 million barrels last week as against the expectation of 10.2 million barrels. Mixed cues coming in from the base metal space, with most names ending flat to marginally lower. Aluminum ended the day unchanged, while zinc and copper fell anywhere between 0.5% to 0.8%. Nickel, tin and lead managed to gain in trade. However, spot gold prices, they continue to trade higher, ending the day in the green as investors continue to remain on the sidelines.
Well, a bunch of news that we'll be tracking this morning. I'm going to start off with Yes Bank, where the board is going to be meeting today to consider the appointment of chairman and the 2 independent directors. Clearly one of the stock that we need to keep an eye out in the trade today. IOCL, where the board is going to be meeting to decide up on the approval of the buyback of equity shares and interim dividend. It's again going to be a rewarding one, so investors would keep an eye out for this one. Lupin, where the company is going to be a negative development for the company, given that the company is expected to pay a fine of around €40 million, which comes after the European Union General Court has upheld the European Commission verdict in Perendoperil case. Also, we'd be looking at Sun Pharma, given that the company's subsidiary has received a tentative approval from US FDA for Dapsone. Apart from that, also one more pharmaceutical counter which is expected to be in focus would be the Stride Station, where the Singapore arm has gotten US FDA approval for one of the ointment which is going to be used for numbing the skin and is expected to launch in the US market soon enough after this approval has come through. Apart from that, an infra company which has received an appointed date, that is Sadbhav Engineering, which has received an appointed date for its 980 crore order in Uttar Pradesh. So with this, it can start the execution of the project after receiving all the financial closure as well as the appointed date. Apart from that, we'd be looking at DLF, which the board today in its meeting held yesterday actually deferred the QIP issue, which is partly a fundraising exercise to make the company a debt-free company. It has now sought shareholders' approval, which is a fresh approval coming in line, given that the validity of the approval lasts only till December 26th. Also, we are looking at Infibeam, which board has now reconsidered or rescheduled the board meeting to December 17 to consider the strategic growth opportunities. And last in our list is Punjab and Sindh Bank, where the bank has planned to raise equity via QIP to the tune of around 500 crore and also is expected to issue bonds to the tune of around 1,500 crore in the span of next 12 months.
Every institution has to have its professional integrity maintain its professional autonomy. At the same time, every institution also must adhere to principles of accountability. We have to have stakeholder consultation. We'll have to have consultation with everybody. Government is ultimately the government has an, government is not just a stakeholder, but I mean, the government of the day runs the economy, runs the country, and manages major policy decisions. So there has to be free, fair, objective, and very frank discussion with between the government and the Reserve Bank of India. And I would like to believe that all issues, howsoever contentious, can be resolved through discussions. I will sort of uphold the autonomy and the integrity and the the credibility of the Reserve Bank of India as an institution, and I would believe that the autonomy and independence of the RBI as an institution is very important, and it will be intact.
The new RBI governor is an Indian Administrative Service veteran. And to that extent, one advantage this appointment could have is to iron out the differences between the government and the central bank. All over the world, we see such differences, but when they come out into the public, that has a sentiment dampening effect, which we have seen in India. If that gets ironed out, and if that so it becomes a thing of the past, that could lead to some degree of, what should I say, a relative lack of volatility in the market. But it's clearly, I think the jury is still out there as far as the kind of policies that the RBI would follow going forward.
Just finally, Manishi, of course, we have seen that sell-off in U.S. markets and that leading to valuations falling. This GTV chart on the Bloomberg showing that forward PEs are back to those 2016 levels. Just quickly, Manishi, tell us, are U.S. stocks going to compete with emerging market stocks for attention from investors next year?
Over past 20 years, there has been only 2 instances of decoupling, where Asian markets have moved in divergent direction compared to the U.S. market. So if there's a sharp correction in U.S. equities, it would quite likely have a similar impact on Asian equities as well. Having said this, I would think that even if the U.S. market corrects, there are a couple of reasons why the Asian markets may not correct to that extent. First, Asian equities are a lot cheaper, both in relation to their expected earnings growth and in relation to the return on equity that we are forecasting right now. Second, as I pointed out, that there's a possibility of the fund flows which deserted Asia and emerging markets in 2018 returning back in some measure to the emerging markets.
Clubbing of investment limits for FPIs. You would recall on 21st September 2018, we had taken out 2 circulars on the eligibility and the KYC requirements of FPI. So this circular, which we intend issuing, will be on clubbing of investment limit of FPIs. In a nutshell, the proposal of clubbing will be on the basis of common ownership of more than 50% or common control. However, in case of appropriately regulated public retail funds, investment limits will not be clubbed on the basis of common control. Accordingly, SEBI will carry out necessary amendments to the SEBI FPI regulations and issue necessary circular guidelines to implement the same. For liquid funds, actually what needs to be done, that we are in discussion with MFI and with mutual fund industry, and will take a view at appropriate time.
The inflation data for the month of November is both good news and bad news. Good news for those hoping for an easier rate stance or lower rates, but bad news for those who are focused on the rural economy and the potential for disruption there. You got CPI inflation in the month of November at 2.3% compared to October's 3.31%. The forecast was 2.6%, so the trend of underperformance to forecast has continued. We're at a 17-month low on CPI inflation, of course, well within the band of the MPC FPC's comfort zone. Food inflation, that's the CPI food inflation, showed disinflation of 2.61%, so negative inflation. Within that, vegetables, sugar and pulses continue to lead the disinflationary trend that we are seeing on food prices. Important to start looking at the breakup of rural inflation and urban inflation as well. And rural inflation stands at 1.7%, well below the 3.12%. That's the bad news part of the inflation data, because it's going to again lead to far more concerns about the rural economy, and you'll start to see politicians talk about farm loan waivers, etc., particularly ahead of a general election which comes up next year. That's the CPI inflation data, so take the good with the bad. In terms of the headline IIP numbers, you got strong 8.1% growth, festive boost, yes, but even accounting for that, the number was quite strong, say economists. Manufacturing printed at 7.9%, that was strong. Electricity and mining also showed a fairly strong growth. If you look at the use-based classification, consumer durables growth at 17% was good, but this is a festive month, so you discount that number a little bit. And the problem on consumer durables will start when the NBFC credit stops flowing, if it stops flowing. Consumer non-durables was decent this month as well at 7.9%. But if you put the two numbers together and try and draw implications for interest rates, I think in any case, a lot of economists had started to expect a softer policy stance and perhaps rate cuts in 2019. You may see more people start to think about rate cuts in the next year.
On the big brokerage calls for the day, first we have is Morgan Stanley on Indigo. Now the brokerage has upgraded the rating on the stock to overweight from equal weight, and has also hiked the target price on Indigo to 1,311 from 790. Now according to the brokerage, the recent down cycle in the aviation industry due to higher cost and lower fares has strengthened Indigo's competitive position. Now Indigo's stronger balance sheet has helped the company gain market share from weaker players in this recent down cycle. However, currently the things have changed as the cost headwinds have receded for the company, while yields, which measure the average earnings per passenger per kilometer, now they have started to rise. On the back of this change in market dynamics and higher market share, the brokerage says that the valuations are also attractive and the risk reward is now favorable to invest in Indigo. The second we have is Macquarie on Ujjivan Financials. Now the brokerage has maintained its outperform rating on the stock, but has cut down the target price on Ujjivan to 290 from 460. Now according to the brokerage, RBI rules have been an overhang on the stock, but the same is an opportunity for long-term investors to buy the stock. Now because of this overhang, the street has overlooked the improving business fundamentals of the company, and the brokerage is expecting the company's book value to grow at a compounded annual growth rate of 15% over FY18 to FY21, while it is expecting the company's return on equity to expand to 16% by financial year 2021. However, the brokerage has cut down its target price on Ujjivan Financials to factor in a higher cost of funds, but it still says that the NBFC could double in value over the next 3 years.
All right, well, there's several stories that you'll find on the website if you look it up right now. That's BloombergQuint.com. Of course, you'll find all the live market action through the day on BloombergQuint.com. But here are a couple of stories that you should consider reading right now. In international news from the US, there's a big one. Michael Cohen, who kept President Donald Trump's business and personal secrets for a long time, is headed to prison, pledging he will continue to spill potentially damaging information to Special Counsel Robert Mueller and other prosecutors. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison on Wednesday in a courtroom appearance in which he spoke with audible emotion, surrounded by family, and in tones that were sharply critical of the president. In other news that you have to look forward to today, the European Central Bank, led by Mario Draghi, is widely expected to end its 2.6 trillion euro stimulus today. Draghi will also likely face questions on how the ECB plans to reinvest maturing bonds that were acquired as part of his central bank's 4-year stimulus package. That's all you need to know going into trade today. Up next is Indian Open, so do stay tuned. This is Bloomberg Quint.